It's been a while. When did we last do one of these? I feel like it's been over a year.
No, dude, it feels long. It was technically last year, but I believe it was the psychedelic series that we did, and I was in Europe at the time. I remember because I was jumping through Airbnbs with wifey.
Yeah, but that was me on yours, right?
Oh
When was the
yeah,
last
that's
time you
right.
were on
That's
this?
right. Oh man. Okay. Yeah, that's
Been a
year for
while.
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Anyways, it's been eventful. Lots has gone on. You've written a book. You've done a lot of moving around. I think you've had some changes in perspective or attitudes towards Bitcoin and perhaps life in general. So I think we both thought it was an appropriate time to get back together for a catch up and see where things are at. So I don't know if you had any place in particular you wanted to start before I crack into some of the things I wanted to touch on.
not necessarily, man. Let's I'll let you guide this conversation.
Well, first of all, kudos on the book.
Thank you.
I have a copy right here.
Thank you.
Really enjoyed it. I can see it having a really positive impact. Well, for a number of reasons, but one, just because it's so simple, clear, and concise, and I thought you guys did a brilliant job in laying the groundwork first with definitions and all that, because as you know, today, words have lost their meaning. And so you're basically
black is
establishing,
white is black.
Right.
Yeah.
So you're establishing what words mean before you go on to use them in the book. So there's no ambiguity, which is great. And it's just, it's the type of simple, almost common sense thinking, at least, to people like you and I, that is so uncommon today. And I think it will really help people rebut a lot of the bullshit collectivist communist sort of philosophy and thinking that is running rampant today. So kudos on putting that together. What was the process like of writing the book? I know you and Mark did a kind of a book sprint, which is kind of mind-blowing because again, it is even though it's short, the quality of the writing is, I think, very good. So what was that like, and what has the feedback or response been?
Yeah, so you were in Salvador, right? When we were there in June or July,
Yeah,
sort of just
when there's a big group of us with Mark and
that's it.
Yeah, Brecky and
Steve and Brecky. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. I thought so. I was trying to I was trying to think in my head. I'm like, am I hallucinating? Was John there? I'm pretty sure you were. That was actually where the idea popped up. So I think Mark and I were having lunch, and he just said, "Have you read he said, "Have you read the Communist Manifesto?" And I just said, "What? Why the fuck would I do that?" He said, "It's really bad." And I'm sure it is, bro.
Yeah,
you don't
but
have to tell me.
I read that, just to butt in before you go on. I read that like 20 years ago, just because I wanted to expose myself to all the philosophies and economic theories and stuff like that. And I kind of forgot about it. And I guess I wasn't primed to really assess it properly or judge it. But I read it because I was reading this and I wanted to, know what you guys were talking about. I cannot believe that book and that way of thinking and the points made in that book are what has motivated or oriented so many people's economic and political philosophy since it was written. It is so awful. I know. It's so poorly argued. There's holes all over it. It's logically inconsistent in many places. I mean, I can't believe it. It's been so influential.
It's mind-boggling, man. When Mark mentioned that in July of 2021, right? And the sort of the idea just sat in the back of our heads for a while. And I had a big change in my personal circumstances in December of 2021, or sort of December, January. So I just hit Mark up in January. I said, "Hey, dude, you want to write this book?" I said, "I'll have some time in January. Let's get together." So we jumped into an Airbnb in Austin and just sort of hit it. And in the sort of week preceding, I did the same thing. I sat down, read the book. I thought, what in God's name did I just read? I read it again, thinking that maybe I'm being too judgmental. I was like, no, this is really bad. Like the as you said, logical inconsistencies, poor definitions. Like he kind of like paints people he doesn't like, with a particular brush, and then just makes a bunch of assumptions of people he doesn't like nor interact with a further set of assumptions. I'm like, Jesus Christ. So when I first started putting notes together, I was just basically doing rebuttals to each of his points. And anyway, when Mark and I got together, we were like, okay, so what are we actually going to write here? Is it going to be like a rebuttal to the book, this and that? And we didn't actually have a direction initially. The book sort of, I don't know, it was kind of like organically kind of popped up. We just said, all right, how about we try and, let's try and emulate the style and the length of the book, because clearly something about the length seems to have maybe contributed to its, success. And there is something to be said about a short, concise book, the law and anatomy of the state being sort of two on the logical end of the spectrum that have done quite well, right? And so we sat down, we kind of split the chapters up. I think I took 1 and 3, Mark took 2 and 4. And we just started like letting the ideas flow. And we kind of, you'll notice obviously throughout the book, there's some sentence structures that we kind of took from Mark's, like, the opening of chapter 1, for example, the structure of chapter 2, where we kind of talk about crony capitalism and all the, the false forms of capitalism. He does a similar thing about socialism and communism. And then in chapter 3 is obviously the 10 points. And we sort of dissected those and made our own 10 points that we thought were more prescriptive for a more functional society. So we did that, but really the book kind of organically emerged, and we got obviously 80% of it done during that book sprint. And then I played editor later, which is why I think there is like a couple spelling mistakes throughout. But anyway, my bad. I'm not an editor. And yeah, I spent a couple of weeks just sort of going through it, refining, editing. And then yeah, we decided to publish ourselves.
And what was that process like? Because most people have never published a book. So what was it like getting it printed, getting it listed? I assume it's kind of easy for Amazon, but like, do you have to work with distributors to get it sent out elsewhere? And then what was the response? Because I mean, on Amazon, the reviews are outstanding, right? You have a lot of really positive reviews. So, what was the feedback? How did it sell? What was the publishing like? Enlighten me.
Yeah, so let's start with the process. So the process was not as difficult as I thought it would be. Like I wasn't sure, like, how do you publish a book? Who do you go to? So we ended up going with Ingram Spark, for example, and they did a great job. They printed the first round of books. You obviously get your price breaks, right? So we ordered a bunch, and I think we overshot the mark initially. Like we ordered something like 2,000 books to sell at the Bitcoin conference as like sort of pre-sale, pre-launch. And that was a dumbass move, because we thought we sold a good chunk. We sold 500-600, right? Like, but
it's not bad. It's not bad.
We didn't do the math, right? Because I thought like the way we did the math was, okay, there's going to be 30,000 people there. I'm sure we'll sell, a couple thousand books, but you get like 2 signing slots of 60 minutes. Like, how do you physically sign 2,000 books in 60 minutes? Like, even if you signed 5 books a minute, which is pretty, on point, that's 300 books maximum in that space of time. So I fucked that up. But you know what? We actually, I think, so other than Saifedean definitely sold more books than we did. He sold the most out of everybody. Like, we were by far the second most sold book. And then sort of everybody else, I think, sold on average like between 30 to 50 books. So we were sort of an order of magnitude more. So that it was good. It did well. We obviously did a Kickstarter as well. And then we sort of used the excess books to fulfill that. That was a little bit complicated because, Mark and I were in different cities. So we had to sign both the books, and that was a fucking nightmare because we had to get in the same city, sign the books and everything. So I realized doing a Kickstarter and offering a signed tier, like, definitely needs to be charged way higher because it's just, and then actually shipping those books, because when you sign and dedicate, like, you're not just sending a signed copy, you got to make sure that one goes to that person. So when we had to send it to the fulfillment company, we had to get a fulfillment company to get them all out. That was a fucking pain in the ass because I had to sit there and tag and label each book and then bundle them together to say, all right, this pack of books goes to this person. And there was a lot of manual work in it. I think it took me like 3 days locked up in the room trying to sort of dedicate each one and sign them and tag them and, you know, put it in the spreadsheet so that way it goes to the right person and everything. But anyway, we learned a lot from the process, and it was good. Like the crowdfund was great. You know, we smashed the goal. We set out to raise $6,000. I think we did over 20. So that was, you know, that was really good. And yeah, and then we just, you know, kept pumping it on podcasts and stuff. I mean, for the last, I don't know, we kind of, the podcast died off in August. So the book, I think, officially launched in August on Amazon. And we just sort of did podcasts coming up into that. And the last big podcast we did was obviously with Alex Jones in August. That was sort of before.
Right. Yeah, I forgot about
that.
That
was hilarious. And I mean, that spiked our sales. Like, and I hope that the book acted as an orange pill for people reading it, because we obviously, I mean, that's the one thing that I think is special about this book, is that it's a Bitcoin book, but it's not a Bitcoin book, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, it sets the stage for that. We only had one short section about Bitcoin in there, and it was succinct. It laid the case for why Bitcoin, not, you know, nothing technical, nothing overly, you know, fancy or confusing or anything. It just laid the case for why you need better money and why Bitcoin's better money and why it's the only form of digital money that sort of, you know, fulfills that promise. And I think, you know, it's probably done a good enough job. Like, you know, so sort of to track back, since August, we haven't done much marketing or promotion or anything. Like, you know, there's still some sales going through. And, you know, what I've learned is that if you're going to be an author, you really need to continue pumping and doing podcasts and doing appearances and all that sort of stuff to make sure that people, you know, get access to it. But yeah, the overall feedback has been fantastic. I mean, I've only seen 2 bad comments, and one was from a guy that said, you know, communism is the worst thing that ever happened in the world. You know, you idiots are writing about it. And I'm like, bro, we wrote a book against communism. Like, so I don't think you read the book. It was just one of those like unverified
review
comments.
Scroll or review troll or something like that.
Basically, what the fuck? So I was like, thanks for your 1-star review, dum. And, you know, despite agreeing. And then there was someone else, like, I think calling Mark a scammer or something like that, whatever. And then, but that's it. Like, other than that, like, other than 2 trolls, we've had like great feedback. And yeah, it's done really well, I think.
How much does an author make on a book? You know, you always hear like, well, if it retails for 20, they make like 2 or something like that. I mean, what's the reality?
Like, we're sort of making, I think, $5 a book, and we split it between us. So like,
and it retails for what?
I think like $13 or something.
That's not bad.
Yeah, I mean, but that's because we don't have a publisher, right? So self-published is you'll make the margin there. Whereas if you had a publisher, then
does it get distributed to like physical bookstores throughout the world, or is it only on Amazon?
Nah, it's only on Amazon. Yeah.
How many have you sold? Just out of curiosity.
I mean, if you count the pre-sales and the Kickstarter and all that sort of stuff, you know, maybe we're at 10K, I think.
That's great, man.
You know, it's not bad. Yeah.
I think it's fucking awesome. Selling 10,000 books. You know, and I agree with your point that, and I mean, I don't know if there's going to be a lot of books like that in the future. It's certainly the case with what I'm trying to write. But if you do a good enough job, you know, explicating the context of what you're talking about and the importance of the forthcoming solution, I don't think you have to I mean, it depends, of course, what angle you're taking, but you may not have to spend too much time on, you know, talking about the solution, in this case, Bitcoin, right? So you kind of like lay out what the problem is, and then you basically just say like, there appears to be an emerging solution to this, or at least something that's going to dramatically ameliorate the circumstance that keeps allowing this thinking and these systems to recur. And of course, right? Because if you just try to pitch someone Bitcoin and they're not primed whatsoever to understand why something like that is even necessary. Like, you can go on and on about 21 million and, you know, Lightning Network and whatever else, but that's meaningless to them because they haven't appreciated the importance of that. They haven't appreciated the utility, the necessity, the implications, all that kind of stuff. So if you do that groundwork first, then I think serving up the solution is a lot easier, and you don't have to be as forceful with your, you know, your argumentation or your persuasion. And so I think books like that probably will be a pretty strong force for orange pilling, because it's not Bitcoin in your face the whole time. It's here's a problem that pretty much everyone can relate to some degree, if you're at all like non-clown world person, you know. And then you're just saying, you know, there's a lot of people propose a lot of different solutions. This is the one that seems to be the most logical in terms of in line with the logic we've used throughout this book. And then of course it's up to everyone to think, you know, how much it makes sense to them and how much they want to pursue a greater understanding. But I think it's awesome. I think you guys did a great job.
Yeah, thank you. I think that sort of what you're talking about there reminds me of sales and entrepreneurialism, which is, you know, more my background than writing. Like I've just sort of stumbled into writing just being a Bitcoiner, right? Which we all seem to, or a lot of us seem to have done. But when I sort of look at it through the lens of being an entrepreneur and selling something, is the classic Simon Sinek thing. Start with why. Right. Like you have to start there. And I think I grasped that early on about Bitcoin, you know, which is sort of one of my early pieces, like before I was a proper Bitcoin maxi, before I was on Twitter or anything like that, was I think I wrote, you know, Homo sapiens, you know, evolution, something Bitcoin, right? Like money and Bitcoin. And then the idea was like, you know, go back throughout history. And, you know, this has sort of been rehashed a million times now in the Bitcoin space, you know, history of money, where we came from, why we need it, blah, blah, blah. But that argument, like, still to this day remains the most important one, is you need to establish why. And I think what we did here is we didn't take that angle, obviously the history of money angle. We just looked at, you know, what is wrong with collectivism? You know, what is wrong with politicking? What is, like, I think one of my favorite things about the book was the capitalism component, which is, hey, let's define what capital is. All right. So if capital is time, energy, and scarce resources, so that's sort of your base layer capital, you know, you could argue second layer capital is, you know, reputation, ideas, you know, things like that, you know. And then, so what's capitalism? Well, hey, it's the effective and efficient use of that stuff. And how's that not a good thing? And how's that not something that human beings have done since the beginning of time? So therefore, like, capitalism isn't politics, it's a process. And if you sort of look at things from that lens, the whole argument shifts. It's no longer about communism versus capitalism. It's about politics versus, you know, organic economics. It's politics versus, you know, human cooperation. It's politics versus productivity. And then, you know, when we've got that spectrum in there that's sort of placed on its side. And I think they're sort of pretty powerful insights. And I know, you know, that sort of stuff, it's essentially a rehash of what the great Austrian economists have discussed for years. But I guess the difference is this is digestible in 80 pages versus, you know, you can take human action on 1,000 pages. Good luck if you get through it, you know.
Yeah, well, case in point, I never could get through human action. Like, I tried reading the book, I tried the audio book, and I couldn't get there. And, you know, even everything needs to be rehashed, if for no other reason. I mean, history is littered with the same ideas, whether it's in the realm of philosophy or theology or economics or anything, but they have to be recapitulated for the time and the context and the culture that they are once again relevant within. You know, we who have a greater grasp of how to communicate to our peers in this time and place need to take those ideas that have lost their salience because they use a different language and they use different emphasis and they're, you know, whatever. And we have to extract the insight or the wisdom or the primary theme, truth, whatever, and explain it again in terms that have a greater salience for our time and place. And so I think it's a tremendous, I mean, it's a tremendous service, but it's nothing to be looked down upon, because it's equivalent to coming up with those concepts yourself, insofar as if you didn't, they wouldn't be available for many other people to consider and therefore integrate into their own perspective and benefit from. So I think it's a tremendous service. I want to read one, because you mentioned definitions and you singled out capitalism. It's one of my favorite definitions in the book, but it says, minus all the definitions projected on it, capitalism is just a natural process of taking resources, time, energy, matter, and turning them into something of higher order value. Its forcing functions are efficiency and effectiveness. Its corrective mechanism is loss, and its positive feedback loop is growth. You know, it's like that cuts through so much of the bullshit, mudslinging and you know what people get on with today in their critiques of capitalism. That's just a very, like, it it's very simple. It is the way it is. You can't really argue with anything here. Now, of course, they will, because a lot of people are so ideologically possessed that they just can't help it. But I just love how the book, it didn't have a lot of fat on it, I guess is one way of putting it. You know, you guys didn't try to grind too much of an ideological axe, despite the name of the book. You just tried to be as objective as possible and put forward objective logic in the realm of, you know, economics, individualism, politics to some degree.
Thanks, man. Yeah, I think I'm pretty proud, I guess, of how it came out. So
what was the Aleks Jones experience like?
It was fucking hilarious. We were in there, and I mean, obviously he didn't have a chance to read it. He was busy with his own book about, you know, whatever the hell he's writing about now. And anyway, like they badgered us to come in there early. And man, I was like moving house that day. It was, you know, 3 days after my wedding. Like, it was fucking pandemonium. I was dropping wife off at the fucking airport. Like, everything was happening that day. And then it fucking stormed, like a rare Austin storm. Like, the roads were flooding and everything. So anyway, finally make it to this place, and he's like, "All right, we're running an hour and a half late." And I was like, "You gotta be fucking kidding me, bro! I'm gonna kill you." So anyway, the place was like a bunker. And yeah, sort of hour and a half, 2 hours later, we got on and we did it. You know, there were some good questions back and forth. And then kind of 3/4 of the way through the interview, he looks at us like, "All right, gentlemen, I'm going to go have a nap. You guys can finish the show." And like, this is sort of mid fucking, like, cause so every, you know, 10, 15 minutes, he takes like a couple minute break, like, to sort of break up his show. And then, you know, Mark and I just look at each other like, "What the fuck?" And he's like, "You'll be fine." You know, he gets up and walks the fuck off. We looked at each other, we're like, "This is kind of serious." Like, all right. So, you know, watching the countdown time down, like, you know, 2 minutes, 1 minute, etc. And we're kind of like talking back and forth, like, "Okay, what are we going to do? What are we going to say?" And actually, if you go back and listen to the episode, you'll see, like, when the final ad roll finishes, you actually hear us going like, "Okay, you ready? All right, let's do this." And it's like, "All right, and we're back." And it's like, we sort of take on the show, hit the last 10, 15 minutes, whatever it was. And yeah, it was an experience.
I bet. What was Aleks like off camera, if you had any FaceTime?
You know,
Crazy man.
He was warm. Like, yeah, no, he's really warm. You know, sort of flustered all over the place. Built like a fucking French bulldog. You know, my sister was there, so she got to meet him, and you know, that was funny. We had a bit of a conversation. So yeah, we hung out afterwards for a little bit, but yeah, I think good guy, big heart. You know, nobody's perfect, obviously. He's got his own sort of problems to deal with and everything like that. I think he was right in the middle of like the Sandy Hook stuff, which I didn't even know what anything to do with Sandy Hook was. Like, I had no idea. I just heard that word floating around. So yeah, he was a bit all over the place with his new book, and he had sold something like, you know, 20,000 copies on sort of directly through his platform, and he was trying to sign 20,000 copies of the book, and I'm like, "No worries, bro. Enjoy." So yeah, it was
I think
it was a unique experience.
I bet. Didn't he didn't they I don't know how to phrase this. Wasn't like the penalty against him in that case like $1 billion or something like that, or
something
it crept up there somehow?
Yeah, God knows what the fuck. Like, they just like slung whatever they could sling at him, and I don't know if he had to go bankrupt or whatever, but anyway, what a shitstorm, basically.
I mean, look, whatever your views are on the guy, you got to hand it to him for being able to like just put up with the onslaught of attacks that have been levied at him for, you know, the last however many years, 30, 40 years, you know, and some more legitimate than others, but I mean, he keeps going. He's convicted in something.
He does. And there's that. And just the funny thing is, like, as much as he's a nut, like, I mean, the fact that 50% of the stuff that he said actually came out to be true is just,
well, that helps, you know, a lot.
Not only credit to him, but also just you know, just funny that that's the world we live in, that, you know, Aleks Jones was actually right. Like, the fact that that's the case just sort of shows you how far gone the world actually is.
Yeah, totally. I also read, well, I read some of the stuff you sent me, which, for working on your forthcoming book, which we can either discuss now or some other time. But I
Yeah, we
also
can
read
hit it a little
your,
bit.
it was the same kind of point, or at least one of the points you made was similar to a piece I think you wrote. Was it December 2022? It was kind of like a year in review of the year in Bitcoin, something like that.
Yeah.
Or yeah, and you put something out last week. I'm getting them all mixed up, but I read them all. Is the point. And it seems that you're somewhere along the lines you had a fairly significant change in perspective on things, both in terms of your view of how Bitcoin is going to develop or play out, how this whole thing plays out, but also, your way of approaching and showing up to whatever it is you want to call your role in this thing, a writer, a speaker, a podcaster, whatever you are. I think it's not uncommon for bear markets to facilitate these kind of self-reflection, these times of self-reflection where you kind of, all the hoopla kind of gets quieted down and all the distractions get quieted down, and you stop thinking about, all the things you're going to have or the lifestyle you're going to have. And, things get really quiet and you get quiet with yourself, and you're whether or not you have to or not, but you're given a lot of time, you have a lot of time to think, what do I really want to be doing here? What's actually meaningful to me? Self-assessment basically. And so it seems like that process has engendered some change in you. So maybe you can share with me what, how and why you've changed.
Yeah, man, 2022 was a rough year for me. Sort of bear market aside, obviously that didn't help. I had some interesting things from a personal sort of life standpoint. I think my propensity to, speak before thinking, kind of, it helped develop an online persona for me that, people expected, Svetski, the toxic one, like sort of all that sort of stuff. And, I leaned into that, and, I ended up, with my position on COVID and politics and stuff like that, it put in danger the business that I'd spent years building, basically. And sort of that sort of came to a head at the end of 2021. And, without going into detail, sort of I I was no longer able to be the head of basically the business that I founded. And that was like, a big shift for me, because, as much as people know me more as a writer or, or a Twitter personality, like I've always been an entrepreneur. I've built businesses, built teams, built products, some successful, some not so successful. Like, there's one that a bunch of people know me from, which I was on Shark Tank for back in, 2015, 2016. But it was a cool app. We built a recruitment automation app. And the whole point was we were building personality profiling for people and trying to kind of like through a Tinder interface, match people to roles based on who they are, not just the skills that they have. But, it was the first time I ever raised capital. I was young. First time I was ever building like a real tech product myself. And also raising capital in Australia is a fucking shit show. Like it's not America. And that's why you have like 3 unicorns that came out of Australia, and they're all debt-based products, So it's not like, there was definitely some challenges. And, it was a business that failed, but I spent 2 years building that, taking no salary and putting all my savings in that, and we didn't succeed in the end. And there was a Shark Tank appearance of me, which just looks really fucking bad when you watch the show, because, like, man, it was funny. So this is a bit of a tangent. I don't know if you want me to go into it.
Yeah,
but
go for it.
It was hilarious. So I was in there for like an hour and something, like hour and 10 minutes or whatever. And I actually knew one of the Shark Tank guys. He was a venture capitalist guy running an accelerator out of Brisbane, just up the road. And anyway, like I thought Shark Tank would be a great way for us to get some publicity. We had already raised some money at a particular valuation, and we just went in there for the publicity and to top up. So beforehand, I'm speaking with the lady that sort of organizing the day and everything. And she's like, all right, so we pre-record the entry and the exit, and, you know, we want to get you saying something spicy. So how about like, you're like a shark going into the shark tank? And I'm like, okay, you know. And so we scripted this stupid thing for me to say, and me like a dumbass, right, thinking that, you know, this is going to be cool, I'm going on TV, you know, I said all this like arrogant sounding shit. So like I got fucking served up. And, you know, I walk into this place, and, you know, of course, when I walk in, like you got to walk in, you got to stand there and like look at the judges. And then they fucked up something with the cameras. So they're like, up, cut. All right, send him back out. So like I had to do the whole fucking walk thing again. So it was like, started off like super awkward.
That sounds horrible.
Dude, it was a shit show. And then, you know, we get into this thing. So I like talk through what I'm doing, blah, blah, blah. You know, the idea is interesting. And then I start, you know, getting the questions. And as I'm trying to answer questions, like the next one fucking cuts in. So I'm halfway through answering a question. The next judge, you know, shark cuts in, and the next one cuts in, the next one cuts in. And, you know, there was two of them that were just asking the dumbest possible questions, like the lady in the fucking red dress, whatever her name is, that does like her claim to fame in business is that she built a, you know, a deals website or whatever. Asking me just like these dumb questions. I was like, you gotta be fucking kidding me. And then the guy that I knew, the venture capitalist dude from Brisbane, who like I saw him backstage, he's like, oh, Aleks, good to see you, blah, blah, blah. He went straight into like his show mode, and he's the character on the Shark Tank that's the asshole, right?
Like
so he
Kevin
just starts
Leary
like
sort of guy,
going basically. And I'm like sitting here thinking, motherfucker, you were just being nice to me, you know, 5 minutes ago. Like now you're like being a cunt. So I was like, oh man. And it started dawning on me, you know, where this conversation was going. So then it just got heated, and basically, obviously they didn't invest. And then I didn't see anything from Shark Tank because the Channel 10, which is the company that, you know, runs Shark Tank, actually went bankrupt. Funnily enough, from their great, you know, operation of a business. And, you know, they almost canned the show, but then like a year later or something like that, it came out. And, you know, what came out was like the 18-minute cut, right? So they cut out all the parts, and they just made me look like an absolute fucking monkey. Like I look like this arrogant shithead that came in trying to raise at a, you know, big valuation. You know, we only needed an extra 200 grand, and we had raised at a 8 mil val or something. So the percentages like looked really bad. So we were asking for 200 grand for something like 2% or something. So, you know, it sounded like really bad. And anyway, that was sort of, that experience. And I learned a lot from that experience. But anyway, I think the reason why did I mention that in the first place? Yeah, my history is entrepreneurial. So, and I have made mistakes and had, you know, some successes and some blow ups, but that's life. So anyway, fast forward to 2022. So had this experience, you know, butted heads with, you know, the Australian regulators and the government and everything like that. So I had to step away from that, and then had this sort of identity crisis in 2022. Like, what the fuck am I doing with myself? I've always been an entrepreneur. I've always built businesses. I can't even fucking run my own company now. What do I do? And, you know, obviously the book was sort of one area to vent. You know, I did some stuff with the Bitcoin Times, you know, which we can have a chat about.
Mm-hmm.
But I think, you know, what ended up happening was I was just like frustrated with Clown World, frustrated with, you know, nomading for 3 or 4 years and, you know, mask Nazis and all that sort of crap, you know, frustrated with the whole business situation, you know, frustrated with, you know, we were trying to figure out how to get visas and trying to, you know, figure out a place to stay, and the amount of, you know, bending over and, you know, stupidity that you had to go through for that. And it certainly came out in Twitter. I think, you know, my 2022 Twitter was basically the way I kind of framed it in that article that I did, you know, at the end of 2022 or in January this year or whatever, is that I was kind of like a young dude pissed off at the world, you know, frustrated that I can't, you know, change it. And a lot of that anger sort of came out in my online persona. And I think people got the impression that I was just a dickhead that had nothing nice to say about anything. And And yeah, so that sort of dawned on me, in December of this year, of last year. I sort of sat down. I was like, man, what do I want? I've put so much like energy and effort like out into the world. I painted a target on my back, made myself a sacrificial goat. I've been fucking arrested on 4 airplanes for not wearing masks, like all this sort of shit. For what? What do I have to show for it? Like, I actually went backwards financially. I went backwards in every fucking dimension that actually matters. Other than obviously my relationship. And I was like, fuck this shit. Fuck Twitter. Fuck, the whole toxic thing. Fuck the whole, putting my neck out and, saying all this crap. Like, I just don't care anymore. So, yeah, I decided to just sort of go back to what originally got me attention on Twitter, which was like thought-provoking writing, and ideas, and sort of more educationally oriented, and focus more on my personal life, my health, my own finances. I'm working on a new startup at the moment, so like, yeah, just kind of in my own lane. I just really don't give a fuck about the world and about all of the sort of the labels and the communities and the whatever the fuck else is going on. Couldn't give a shit. Like, yeah, so it's a big change in that, and it's been fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of that resonates with me. I've been more and more quiet on Twitter. I mean, now that Nostra has popped up, it's just a better vibe. So I find myself enjoying engaging there more, and so that's a little bit different. But I would always, I'd be about to send out a tweet, and then I'd be like, this just seems like a cheap, low-hanging fruit shot. Like, of course the world is super fucked up, and of course there's a ton of retarded people doing retarded things everywhere. Is that how I see myself, as just another one in the chorus that points that out and goes, ha ha, you guys are fucking morons? And I don't want to be that person. That's not me getting the most out of myself. That's not me directing my attention to what's most meaningful. That's not me amplifying or building or contributing to what's most meaningful or beautiful or truthful or whatever. And so I'd find myself like being almost there, and then being like, no, that's the wrong, to use kind of a woo-woo language, but that's the wrong energy, right? I don't want to be in that. And and so you basically, if you don't have, it's not the old saying from your mom, like, if you don't have something nice to say, don't say anything at all. But for me, it was like, if I don't have anything constructive or positive or creative to say, why just be another one in the chorus calling out clown world? And the flip side of that is, there is utility in the people that do that, because that content reaches people that go, oh really, I hadn't thought of it that way before. Oh, I didn't realize things were so absurd. And that can instigate their own journey on learning how crazy things are and changing their perspective, taking the red pill, taking the orange pill, and on it goes. But I just felt for myself like that's not my game. I want to be involved in things that are just more positive, more constructive, more meaningful to me. And if there's an audience for that, if people appreciate it or value it, then wonderful. And if they don't, then that's fine too. I never did anything for like the numbers or the engagement or anything like that. But as you said, like, especially over the COVID years, there's so much frustration that just builds up. Like, part of coping with it is those like flare outs that exactly. You're just venting. You just point, you can't help but point out how crazy things are, just so people know you see it. And it's a helpless cry, basically, because it doesn't really do much. But again, you're venting, you're coping in some way. And it's totally, I think a lot of us can understand it, because it was such a crazy time. And in many cases, although that particular circumstance has waned a little bit, there's still a ton of stuff worthy of being frustrated and outraged about in clown world. But again, like, to what end, and to what cost as well. And I think we would all agree, like, we've all been down that road of doing that. And as you said, where does it leave you? Probably not where you want to be, and not even in the direction that you want to go. But if you focus on things that are meaningful, and if you focus on, winning in however you construe that, then that's got to be a better use of time. And I think I think a lot of us are figuring that out. And the last thing I'll say about that is in your most recent piece, that's the one where you said basically Bitcoin adoption is going to happen more slowly than people think, right?
Yep. Yep.
And this is something that we've talked about before. I focus on a lot. The process of being subject to or contributing to or engaging in a paradigm shift of this scale is that constant, like, grinding forge of change that you have both subjected to yourself voluntarily and in many ways are experiencing on a subconscious level. And so, like, I feel like these sort of ups and downs, these these periods of self-reflection where you end up having a fairly substantial change in your perspective and how you orient yourself and the things you're working towards, I think that's just par for the course, and probably will be for a long time, because we are coming from, you and I and our generation were conditioned in like the height of fiat. Like, we are products of fiat culture, and we managed to stick our head up out of the pulpit and like look at the the blue sky or see through it. But it doesn't mean we can just shake off all the conditioning that we've been subjected to and that we've taken on board and used to construct our personality and our perspective and our beliefs and our philosophies. That's a much slower process, and it takes engaging the world to figure out what ways in which we need to change that to be most fruitful or most conducive to the things that we want to achieve or are most meaningful to us. So I think as this process that you laid out in that piece takes place. Now, who knows if you're right with the periods, but let's just say that we're obviously in a process of some kind. And I do think that, and most of the people I talk to on this podcast these days are just random Bitcoiners out in the wild. And the reason why I do it is because I love to hear those stories. I love to hear people, whatever background, whatever they were dealing with, the more they go down the rabbit hole, the more they find themselves like forging a new persona, forging a new identity, and one that they deem to be far more, competent and positive and hopeful and constructive and strong and courageous, and all the virtues that we would probably all the virtues that we would probably agree on. These are the things that they're using to reconstruct an identity, and this process that they've put themselves in, i.e., adopting Bitcoin and the global adoption of Bitcoin, seems to be the primary catalyst for that. And so I think it's great that you have the strength or the courage or the humility to say like that you have changed your perspective on things, and you look back on some of your behavior and you think perhaps it wasn't the most productive or the best use of your time, because I think a lot of people right now are probably feeling a similar way. There's a lot of frustration and a lot of bullshit and a lot of excitement and a lot of hoopla, and just that toxic mix of all that within a fiat system and within a fiat mentality. It's gonna throw you off course a little bit, I would say. And I think a lot of people, as far as I can tell, are going through this process of reflecting now and being like, what is the thing that I want? Well, who do I want to be? And what is the thing I want to focus on most with my limited time and resources? And how, and the rest, I just want to cut out. I want to cut out the noise. I want to, I don't want to engage in all the clown world stuff. I don't want to waste my time scrolling on Twitter and seeing all the videos that are so super crazy. Like, why? What is that doing for me? And so I think a lot of people are experiencing that right now.
It's funny. I started like unfollowing and muting a lot of that stuff because sort of, my philosophy obviously was, in the beginning, kind of rage against the machine. So sort of 2020 and 21 was rebel. 2022 kind of morphed into, and I actively was one of the people saying this, is like, now's the time we ridicule these idiots into oblivion, right? And just ridicule, and you sort of saw the rise of the clown world accounts and all that sort of stuff. And we did, like, we effectively won the war through ridiculing the fuck out of all of this stupidity. We won the meme war effectively. But sort of, the strategy now, for me at least, I don't know about others, but for me, it's kind of turned into just ignore now. Now it's like the move on stage. And, the ridiculing, the problem with ridiculing is that it can get nasty, it can get mean. And for me, kind of, I feel like a lot of the, I really tried to say the right thing. And the thing is, even though I was ridiculing, even though I was toxic and everything, I was right about everything I said. Like I was one of the earliest ones to point out the COVID stupidity, you know, like a lot of the things I said were right, but, you know, maybe the way I said them was, you know, abrasive or toxic or provocative or whatever. Right. And, you know, you do that because one, out of frustration, and two, because sometimes you just need to fucking shake people to say like, no, like this is what it is. You need to sort of shock people into looking at something. But when I look back on it and say, all right, so I stuck my neck out, you know, I said all these things, you know, I made myself a target, you know, I painted a big red fucking thing on my back, you know, being a public figure. What did I get for it? Like, you know, towards the end of 2022, I had Bitcoiners telling me that I'm a scammer, that I'm a fucking, you know, what is it, like you know, a fake Bitcoiner because like I lost the, you know, debate to Richard Hart or whatever. I was like, you got to be fucking kidding me. Like sort of like all of the shit that I put myself out for, like I got a bunch of like fucking hate from even in the Bitcoin community. I was like, you know what, fuck this. Like, it's not worth it. It's not worth the energy. It's not worth the time. And that was sort of, you know, at least to some degree, I'm thankful for that because that sort of pushed me away from it kind of, you know, maybe in a way it actually was my catalyst to sort of drop the ridicule stage and change my strategy to ignorance stage, because now I'm just not interested. And as you said, like when you do that and you move away from the noise, and you cut that out, like life is so much more peaceful. Like I just blocked a shitload of people. You know, I just like cut that out of my fucking mental system. Like I exited a bunch of Telegram groups, like all that sort of stuff. Like I just cleaned up and it felt so fucking good, man. I can't even tell you. Like, you know, there was, I remember there was this one dude like trying to, you know, I've got like a bunch of YouTube playlists, and one of my YouTube playlists had a series of videos from Yuval Harari. And, you know, 5 years ago, I was interested in that guy's work because I thought Sapiens was a good book. You know, like I was following him until obviously COVID and everything happened. And you saw, you know, what Bugman was really about. And, you know, this guy's sort of saying, you know, I remember like there was this whole, you know, it was like a, you know, classic Twitter fiasco, you know, that sort of lights up for 24 or 48 hours. And they were like, oh, you know, Aleks is like a World Economic Forum guy. You know, he's on the side of Yuval Harari, fake big. I was like, you've got to be fucking kidding me. Like, what in the fuck? And, you know, they sort of pointed out that, and then they found like me referencing him in a previous article and stuff like that. It's like, oh, you know, here's proof, the gotcha. I was like, okay, bro, like, no worries. Like, you know, all of the other stuff is irrelevant, you know, but that's apparently relevant. So yeah, I just figured, you know, I underappreciated privacy, and I underappreciated how fickle, you know, just people in general are. And I don't know, it, as you said, like quality over quantity, and that's sort of become my mantra. Like I'm really not interested. Like for me now, like I'm way quicker to block, way quicker to ignore, way quicker to mute, because my time, my energy is just more valuable. I'd rather spend it with my gorgeous wife on the fucking beach. I'd rather go with her to fucking CrossFit. I'd rather write another article. I'd rather work on the new startup. You know, I'd rather add a little bit to my book, like way more. And, you know, when it's weird. I've had such even social media fatigue, man. Like I can't get into Nosta. I can't get into like, I can't, you know, I bought some thread writing stuff for Twitter, because I was, you know, planning that this year I was going to just write threads and all that sort of stuff. I just don't give a fuck. Like I seriously just don't care. Like it's just so meaningless to me. And you know, that's why I sort of killed my podcast as well, because I just, you know, I'm sort of done. Like I don't really care about getting out there and, you know, doing all of that stuff anymore. Like I don't know. I got like it's a big sort of change for me, and it just feels really good.
Well, I mean, this will come as no surprise because I know we line up on a lot of things, but you know, I feel very similarly, and I think a lot of people probably do too. And you know, probably a confluence of reasons, right? I mean, bear markets always kind of refocus people, like what's important. There's not as much loose money, loose attention, events and stuff dragging you this way and that, so you have more time to determine what you want to focus on. And then there's also like, first of all, I totally agree. And I had been getting that social media fatigue for a long time because I don't care about followers or clout or notoriety or anything like that. And if you really don't care about that, how? And I also like, I don't necessarily presume that people want to know every little thought that pops into my head, even if it's like somewhat insightful. So it's like, if you put those two things together, you're probably not going to be tweeting very much. And at the same time, Elon took over Twitter. I love it. More free speech, less censorship, but the experience is also different. And it's
so much worse. Honestly.
Yeah, exactly.
It's actually worse. Yeah.
Right. So, and that kind of sucks because I think he did a good thing, whatever your opinions on Elon are, but information can obviously be published more freely on Twitter now. But whatever he did, made it a less engaging experience for the other aspects of that platform that we all probably found valuable. So there's all these factors that go into this stuff. And I think like, I wouldn't be, and I don't think you are, but just broadly speaking, like, I think it's good it's good to reflect and make adjustments, but not be too harsh on past behavior, because you were interfacing with a different time and context also, right? It's not even logical to go back with your current perspective and place it within that context, because it's not how you would have been thinking, that the circumstance drives a lot of your emotions and your thoughts and your ambitions and things you find meaningful. So, I think it's good to go back and reflect and reorient, but not necessarily, have too much regret or guilt or anything associated with past behavior. Of course, unless it's like really egregious and you're a piece of shit, basically. But it's a different story. Also, man, the other thing, speaking about fatigue, as the Twitter files drop and as there's more free speech, and like, I'm glad that it seems like the COVID stuff is falling apart and more truth is getting out. Like, that's all wonderful, and I kind of assumed it would eventually. Now maybe it will never to the extent that I would hope it does, but obviously people are able to discuss so-called conspiracy theories more freely now than they were before, and that's great. But this obsession with the enemies, like especially in Bitcoin land, like you said that someone took you to task for like the World Economic Forum stuff, like I so don't care about those people at all, because sure, I know they're powerful and they're influential, and maybe they're doing things to try to fuck up things that I deem to be important and meaningful and that I want to have in the world. But I don't see how me caring about them changes that. To your point, like the best thing that I think I can do is engage in the things that make me the strongest, the happiest, the most fulfilled, engage in things that are most meaningful, and try to figure out what's most valuable about what I can do, that I can contribute to something. And that in itself is the process of fighting back against that stuff, not finding someone's name on a website and being like, you're a shill, you're a two-face, you're a spook or something like that. Like, if anything, that's probably counterproductive, because then that sort of reactionary approach can be weaponized by people that actually want to stir the pot or execute a psyop or something like that. And so, Saylor has been off to use this phrase, and it's not perfectly apt here, but he often says, don't be a martyr, be a winner. And that kind of came to mind when you were saying what you did, because in 2022 perhaps, or leading up to that, or these airplane arrests and that kind of stuff, I mean, you were taking a stand for what you thought was wrong, and I have a ton of respect for that. But to what, at what cost? Would you rather have, or moving forward, instead of fighting those small battles where there's not really anything to truly gain, would you rather hold your capacity and strength back and deploy it where you can have the greatest effect, both for yourself and perhaps outwardly, and do that? And if we all do that, isn't that the way that we build the circular economy? Isn't that the way we obsolete the bad tech, the bad bureaucracies, the bad people? Like, isn't that the way it's done? Not fighting these highly contentious battles and stirring up all this tension everywhere where we might find something that's counter to our own, philosophy or perspective on things.
Yeah, I mean, look, maybe there's something to be said for like thinking of it through the lens of war, right? Like, so there's a time when you need to be a soldier on the battlefront, and maybe that is, arguing with someone at the airport or getting arrested on an airplane or something like that. But then there's a time when you sort of like move to, uh, I don't know, lieutenant, and then colonel, and then general, right? Like you move up, and then you fight a bigger battle, as you said, or you fight more strategically and less tactically. And maybe it's just a rite of passage that we have to go through, and so that way we remember it's like, what this cost me, or what I had to do to sort of stand up for what I believe in, etc., etc. So as you said before, maybe not being too critical of that stuff is important, but it's like taking at least the energy and the spirit of, or the essence of what that pushback was, and then just playing a higher game. And Saylor is someone who does this very well. He's very, 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 very strategic. He's not tactical. And what I was playing was a tactical game, and young, stupid, full of energy. Maybe I had to play the tactical game for a little while, until I kind of realized that, hey, all right, I earned my stripes, I got a few battle scars, and now it's time to do something more strategic. And like the couple of things that I'm working on now are way more fucking strategic, and they're going to be way more meaningful in fighting the broader battle. But I ain't going to be doing it from 160 characters on Twitter, or whatever, like 1,000 characters Elon Musk fucked up Twitter with now. Ain't gonna happen there. Like, I'm gonna do it far more selectively, and just to harp on the word, strategically. So I think to your point, like the battle has to be fought at multiple levels, and I'm just choosing a different game to play now.
I think you mentioned in that piece, or one of them, that you, and this is consistent with what you just said, but that your focus now is more on quality, perhaps, or at least that's something that's become more elevated in terms of what drives or determines your projects or actions or whatever. And again, I totally agree with that. You it's not uncommon for like a year to have a theme for me at the beginning. Like, it's just I write a several page letter to myself every like January 2nd, let's say. And usually it emerges in that. And the one this year was, and this will sound somewhat corny, but it is what it is, was beauty. Like that's the theme for the year. And I've been finding myself, anytime I get dragged into clown world stuff, that is a good thing to reorient myself. It's like, is this beautiful? Is it, is this the kind of thing you want to? No, it's not. Yeah. What else in your, vicinity, what else that you can focus on, what else that you can work on, has the capacity to be beautiful, or is inspiring in some way, or is in that general neighborhood. And, it's beauty's hard to argue with too. And this is one of the things that you've touched on a little bit in the past, and people have also taken a little bit of issue with, is the notion that, beauty is not subjective. Now, I mean, there's an easy kind of like perspectival way to discredit that and just say, well, you're only one individual perceiving being, so anything that you perceive is subjective in that sense. But I think I like your points, and I think in today's dialogue around that subject, or everything has become subjective and relativistic, right? In clown world, right? So there is no truth, and there is no beauty, and so there's nothing, basically. There's just chaos. There is no order. And that's actually part of the point you make, is that we tend to, what inspires us with that sense of beauty, or when we find things that are of profound symmetry and integrity with all other systems that we are nestled within, most of which we have no way of perceiving. But that's what beautiful things do. They condense down those patterns within patterns within patterns, and they just show up as one thing, and you're awestruck by them, or your mind goes blank as a result of witnessing them. And so all that just to say, I mean, I think that's for me at least, and for this year, it's been helpful to bring me back on a more productive course when I start kind of going off course in focusing on that particular thing. Like, is this a beautiful endeavor? Is this a beautiful way to devote your attention? Is this a beautiful thing that, you know, you should be giving access to your consciousness and your perspective, because that's what you're doing when you're sending your attention down all these threads, streams, whatever? Or do you want to redirect your attention to something beautiful, and how might that orient your behavior better? And I think the answer is a lot better. It's way more effective.
Pardon the pun, but that's beautiful. Like, honestly, I still stand by it. So I think you might be referencing the tweet that I did last year, which was the bush pig tweet.
Only because I read it in you referenced it in one of the recent articles. I can't remember which one.
I did. Yeah, that's right. Okay, I did forget that I did that. All right. So yeah, my bush pig tweet. And the thing is, like, this is what I said earlier. It's like my tweet's actually accurate, but it's just not delivered very nicely, right? It was delivered very brutally. You know, the context behind that was actually I had just gone through an immigration process where I wanted to strangle someone, and like I was already angry, and then I saw a dumb tweet from somebody, like one of these sort of trad masculine guys, saying that, you know, beauty in your partner, like in your wife, is like a low priority, like it doesn't matter. And I was like, get the fuck out of here. Like, beauty is so important, like, and I don't care what anyone says, like, you know, you want to, like, beauty is actually, you know, representative of so much more, as you said: symmetry, harmony, health, like all of these sorts of things. And like, to sort of, you know, to me, that was just like, when I read that tweet, it was like I could smell cope coming through the thing. So like, you know, we're sort of driving through, and, you know, my, you know, classic Twitter like tirade message, I was like, all right, fuck you. And then like the bush pig comment came out. And there was a section in that which was about obviously passing on superior genes. And I meant that as like, you know, what you should do is you should find, like, if you're a man, you know, you're duty bound to find a woman with extraordinary genes, so that you can increase the likelihood of, you know, success and you know, beauty for your children. Because you know, as much as people might not like to admit this, like, beauty does help. You know, it comes with its own costs. Like, for example, my wife, you know, she gets so much envy from people, like, and she's grown up like that because she's just naturally fucking gorgeous. She's naturally symmetric. She's got all the sort of the beautiful attributes. And, you know, the downside of that is, you know, people sort of treat you differently. You know, they try and like she has a lot of trouble with other women, because other women are always like trying to, you know, hurt her or do something in other ways, because they're sort of jealous of her in some sense. But anyway, like, at the end of the day, irrespective of those costs, I think it's still better to be, you know, to pursue beauty and to be beautiful in some sense. So anyway, when I said that, then obviously, you know, half of Twitter sort of lost their minds, and they're like, oh, you know, fucking genes, and you're a fucking midget, and, you know, what the fuck are you talking about genes for, and everything like that. Not like, they missed the point. Like, I know I'm fucking short. I don't have fucking great genes. So like, I married a fucking woman that has better physical genes than I do. I have the fucking brain. Bring us together, and, you know, we're gonna have great babies. But anyway, like, coming back to your point about beauty, it's fundamentally not subjective. It is really not subjective. And I think this is something that a lot of the libertarian, you know, Bitcoiner individualist sort of groups miss out on. And it's actually no wonder why a lot of libertarian people are actually like fucking fat, you know, basement dwelling keyboard warriors.
There he is. He's back.
Okay, I'm back. All right. But like, you have a lot of that sort of class of people who will go and try and make a philosophical argument for beauty being completely subjective, just because they worked out that value is subjective, and they'll try and lump it in the same place. But I'm sorry, there is actually objective things in the universe. You know, there's things that are harmonic. There's, you know, like, music is objectively sounds good, you know, because it's got, you know, 8 octaves. Like, there is things that, whether we can explain it or not, exist, When you look at a sunset, when you look at the mountains, when you look at the sort of the earth and that sort of pale blue dot, aura effect, like there are things that exist that transcend subjective valuations and the whole fucking libertarian ethos of like, nothing has objective value or whatever. And beauty is one of those things, and I'll stand by that. I couldn't care less what people say, but I actually, one of the funny things here is that I had a debate with a girl in fucking Brazil, like over text, and this was like sort of years ago, about this subjective nature of beauty. And she actually stumped me because I was like full on in my libertarian zone. Like, I was doing podcasts at that time with like, Kinsella and all these people. And, she asked me, is beauty objective or subjective? And I was like, of course, everything's subjective, blah, blah, blah. And I sort of made this whole, classic anarcho-capitalist sort of argument of why beauty is subjective. And she's like, yeah, nah, I don't agree with you. I think beauty is both subjective and objective. There's subjective elements to it, but there's a sort of higher order objectivity to beauty. And, she explained a few examples. I can't remember them now. It was a couple of years ago, but that sort of stuck with me. I was like, fuck, I'm actually wrong. And from that point on, like I sort of, my thinking around that changed. And, the more mature I've become, the more I've like, particularly when I've read history and things like stories of the greats and of the, of the people who've moved the world and changed the world, like sort of, reading some Nietzsche and the great man theory of, history and all that sort of stuff, you come to realize that things like beauty, transcend, the chaos of the mundane. And there's, I think there's something to be learned from that. And, would the current Aleks say it differently? Yes. But anyway, it had to be said at the time. And
but
I have not deleted the tweet.
It's a very interesting topic, and one that I've been thinking and writing a lot about. But I mean, part of the debate around it would just be like a matter of definition, right? And that's not an interesting debate. But I think everything is experienced subjectively, right? So from that perspective, yes, you can call everything subjective, but the results or the things that manifest in the world obviously have a difference in quality, right? As you said, things can be more harmonious. They can be harmoniously productive. So you can get flourishing, let's say, or they can be destructive. They can be degrading. They can be disintegrating. They can cause breakdown. And it almost seems like, and this is kind of the irony is that a lot of these, libertarian people, if we're going with this kind of stereotype, is that they would equally rail against this like kind of general moral relativism that's happening in the world today. They would say that it's bad, but they themselves are kind of taking the same position because they're saying that everything is subjective and there are no absolutes, right? There are no absolute truths. And then if you look at like, well, what do those perspectives produce in the world? As you say, like that'll show up in your body, that'll show up in your family, that'll show up in your intellect, your way you articulate yourself, what you're able to build in terms of a life, the community that you're a part of. And this is actually one of the things that lends itself to the argument for let's just say like a traditional faith. What does acting as if an absolute truth does exist in the form of what you might call God or any other label you put on it? What does that produce in this reality, right? What does that set of what do those parameters elicit? And again, people will split hairs on this because much bad and tragic things have arisen in the name of religious faith. But on an individual level, it seems like it produces things that are in harmony with something, right? Because they're able to be built in a manner that's strong, that's cohesive, that's generative, that's harmonious, that's all those good things. And that's apparent when you meet these people or these communities or whatever. And again, this is a long discussion if we really wanted to tease apart all the nuance, but just to say, I mean, I think the notion that there is something in the realm of truth, in the realm of beauty, that coherence with, or at least appreciation of, generates outcomes of like kind or beneficial outcomes, whereas rejection of or ignorance of generates the opposite. And so does that not suggest that there is something more than just your subjective opinion on a given thing? Like, you can still reject something that's beautiful, but that doesn't mean it's not beautiful. That would be the case. That would be the argument in such a circumstance. Like, you can reject truth. That doesn't mean it's not true. It just means you suffer the consequences of rejecting it.
Correct.
And you know, I think well, that's a discussion that should probably be had in greater detail or written about more, because I mean, I think that touches on the religious domain, it touches on beauty, it touches on economics, it touches on value. And you know, it doesn't get that much press in the age of like the left ultra relativistic stuff, and in the right ultra individualistic stuff, where again, in neither case is there really any absolute truth, or at least the appreciation of or recognition of absolute truth, should it exist.
Yeah. You as you were describing that, I thought of, like, you know, this idea of, you know, you're free to be fat if you want to, like, for example, but don't tell me that it's beautiful, you know, or virtuous or anything like that. You know, you're free to, you know, paint your fucking house polka dot colors and rainbows and all that sort of stuff, but don't tell me that that's beautiful. You know, like, you're free to make a piece of art that's a fucking banana with a sticky tape on it, but don't try and make the argument that it's beautiful. Like, so all, you know, and you know, that's so spot on. Like, you know, your subjective interpretation of what you think is beautiful or not is sort of irrelevant. You know,
the other thing I think of a lot is, in this context, is like churches, you know, like these massive ornate churches, and people, you know, a lot of secular people will go into them, and you know, it'll be awe-inspiring in some way. They'll feel something and they'll respect it, but you know, it's like, why is that so awe-inspiring? Why does that conjure up those emotions? Why is why, you know, why was so much work devoted to doing them? And also, what has been brought to bear to put that together? And again, in line of the thinking we were just talking about, like, I think at least an element of that, because I'm sure there's many, is think of the mathematics and the architecture and the geometry and the detail, like all the other disciplines, all the other knowledge that has converged to allow this thing to manifest, to be built. And all of that stuff, like, is necessarily tethered to physical laws, patterns that were embedded within, right? Like truths, things that, like gravity and math, like, and geometry and math, and you know, like all these things that we've had to figure out how they work. And then these buildings are representations of, like, the height of our ability to weave something in between those, let's call them absolute truths. And then if we can be successful in doing that, then we stand back from it and go, like, wow, like we've just brought together so many forces to allow this thing to exist. And it is almost always awe-inspiring, you know, if you have any sort of sensibility whatsoever.
Yeah, you're literally describing harmony there. Like
exactly.
You're the bringing together of things so that they fit is a harmony of sorts. And that's essentially, you know, the best version of, you know, the best kind of, like, you know, raw definition of beauty that I can think of is that, you know, that thing that is harmony, you know, things coming together, they fit, and they I don't know, they fit. There's no better word to sort of describe it.
Yeah. I mean, whether it's beauty or truth, like, perhaps, you know, a possible definition is the things that foster the greatest harmony, right? So as your example in music, like when you play the notes and the frequencies that they're contained therein and all that kind of stuff, properly, you get a harmony. When a family or a community is oriented by a particular truth, you get flourishing, you get a harmony between its members and all that kind of stuff. And the same is true for a building. You know, when you bring together the knowledge of all the forces that it's acting within, you have the potential to get a harmony, so perhaps harmony and beauty is simply the result of properly navigating the forces that you're subjected to and bringing them together in
the truest form.
Like appreciate the truest form, recognizing and appreciating the truth of the forces that you're subject to, and then manipulating the world that recognizes that. And I think that's part of the reason why we say in something like a church, we're glorifying God, the all-encompassing, all those forces all encompassed, because it is that. It is recognizing that those are the forces that exist, and we're spending our time and resources to try to showcase, something about them in our building of that. And that's glorifying them in some way.
Totally. And I mean, that extends obviously to ideas, to written work, to visuals, down to like, the way you construct your body, right? Like, to go, like, I mean, you have your two different examples, right? I always use that meme of the Indian fake bodybuilder who pumped his muscles up full of synthol, right?
Yeah.
Like, that's not, you can tell that's not beautiful, right? Because it's like, it's out of proportion, it's all messed up. And then you sort of have the other spectrum is like people, and we see this a lot on Twitter and everything, is like, you got these fat slobs that are, on cover magazines now. It's like, I'm sorry, but that's just, it's disgusting. It's not beautiful.
Yeah.
Versus, someone who's put the work in to, shape their body to look good. And, I guess, without going down this rabbit hole too much, but, women and men are different in this case. Is like men have to construct themselves, whereas women are born largely, with their assets. And yes, they have to take care of themselves and do all that sort of stuff. But, women have a different genetic predisposition than men do, and we have to construct ourselves. So like, I get up fucking every morning, go and bust my ass at the gym so that I am not a fucking fat slob or, unfit or, have a gut or whatever like that, because, there's something to say about aesthetics. And then, as you said, all the stuff that goes in behind that to kind of produce something of, of beauty and everything is a submission to higher truths, as you said. Like, it's a submission to, maybe perhaps the greatest truth of all, proof of work, right? Like, you have to work at something to produce something of beauty.
Yeah, I think that's well said. And the only other thing I will say, hopefully, is not as a counter argument to this, but as I think legitimate nuance is, as you mentioned in so much of your writing, I mean, hierarchies develop anywhere where there is value or meaning, right? It's just inevitable. It's how consciousness works, basically. It's how human societies organize, all that kind of stuff. And so an interesting question might be, what is the hierarchy of beauty? So we could say, and none of these are separable, right? They're all inseparable. But let's just say, you might say, wow, that you see a woman on the beach and she's a 10 out of 10 physiologically, but to what degree does if you come to know that person or come to know another person, you perceive a tremendous beauty in their soul, let's say, in just how they show up in life and how, whoever they are, like whatever your metrics are, whether it's compassion, empathy, love, all that kind of stuff, and you perceive a beauty of that kind. And then, a question is like, well, which beauty is higher up on the hierarchy? And, we might say, well, that's up to each person to decide. But in line with this discussion we've been having, it's like, well, is there an actual so-called proper place in the hierarchy for those different forms of beauty? Because just as a body or a church is molded by, let's say, those truths that we've been discussing, so too would be one's character and their consciousness and how they're able to form that and leverage it and express it into the world. I mean, that is also still subject to all these invisible absolute forces, let's say. And so which one is more important, or which one is more valuable in the end? And maybe it's the case that it's, I think a lot of people would probably say this, it's not the physiological beauty, it's the spirit, it's the personality, it's the character. Yes, well,
yes, we are. Yep.
Yeah. So the only point I was making was like, is there a hierarchy of beauty? Because we tend to think of it as just, you know, physical beauty, right? But you know, it's certainly the case that the beauty of someone's soul, character, personality, whatever, could supersede that of their physiology, and therefore one might be rational in acting in accord with that, in acting as though that were more important. And of course many people do, right? And that's probably some of the source of the pushback that you got in particular. And maybe you were making just still like a more isolated point on physical beauty itself, but I think, like, especially when you're choosing a partner, let's say, I mean, again, hierarchies abound everywhere. And so when we're talking about something like beauty in relation to beauty of an individual, well, yes, it's like their physical beauty is the most obvious one, but there's other elements of them that you might deem beautiful and that might even be more important or consequential to you than their physiological beauty. And that would somewhat counter what we were saying before, although I don't think
it doesn't counter. I think they're all intertwined, right?
Right.
Because
exactly.
and so there's not only the hierarchy, but generally they're indicators of each other, right? So yeah, sure, I've dated hot chicks that have fucking 2 brain cells and that have the personality of a fucking, you know, a park bench, right? And did I marry them? Hell no. Like, so there's like, you know, these things generally sort of you know, so that's actually an example of the hierarchy piece. But then what I've also found is that most people who and again, this is a heuristic, it's not true all of the time, but you know, as with all heuristics, but people who generally put the effort in to look a certain way physically, and actually put the work in. I'm not saying like shoot themselves with a fucking makeup gun, but actually put the work in to do some work. That generally says something about the kind of character or inner beauty they have as well. And you know, so when I talk about that sort of stuff, that's sort of what I mean. And you know, often the physical is an indicator. And you know, Nietzsche talks about this, is like, you know, one of the modern fallacies is the sort of separation of the mind and the body, as if they, you know, evolved separately. It's like, well, no, I'm fucking sorry, they didn't. Like, the mind and the body are inextricably linked. Like, what makes us human is that we have a hand and we have these eyes that, you know, are feedback loops to the brain. And you know, and sort of Spengler talks about this in depth in his book Men and Techniques, which is one of the best, like, it's one of those short reads that'll like blow your mind. And you know, he just sort of says like the eyes are what allow us to perceive the world. And you know, we have predator eyes. Like, our eyes are put on the front of our head, they're not on the side like fucking herbivores, which is prey, right? So we have predator eyes, and we have this appendage called the hand, which is unique in the animal kingdom to such a degree that we can actually manipulate space to a far greater dexterity and complexity than any other species on the planet can do. And you sort of combine those, you have this unique feedback loop to the brain that is, you know, arguably where someone like Spengler says, you know, at least our level of intelligence was able to sort of develop from. So anyway, what I'm trying to say with that is that, you know, physical beauty does have a relationship to, you know, inner beauty, soulful beauty, you know, intellectual beauty, and all this sort of stuff. That there is something there.
All right, so we should probably close it down soon, but there's 2 things I wanted to bring up.
Yep.
Right. So in your article about the kind of preparing oneself for this whole Bitcoin paradigm shift to take longer than, you know, some of its proponents might like, you mentioned a couple things. One is the tinkering with Bitcoin, you know, and this is kind of an ever-present discussion, debate, like how much should we tinker with this thing? And I think in my opinion, there's really not enough discussion on that topic. You know, it seems to be the case that, you know, technically proficient people, core developers, whatever, come up and say, hey, like, look, we can make Bitcoin do this, you know, wouldn't that be great? And then, you know, people go, Yeah, that would be cool. That, let's do that. Or yeah, that would be cool, but let's not do it because, and there's no real discussion about like how we should be looking at changes to this thing, and to what degree does the frequency of changes create, attack vectors in the future. And also, and to the point from your article, or what your article made me think about is like, how much patience should we be having? Because you often hear the comment like, well, if we want Bitcoin to be adopted by more people, it has to act differently. It has to do X, Y, and Z to appeal to, whatever demographic. And then so it's like, oh, well, we need to build that into Bitcoin so that it can appeal to them. But it's like, well, how do we know that? How do we know it's not just a matter of time? How do we know it's not just, to your point, a generational thing? Like it doesn't matter what you make it do. A certain portion of people, probably a big portion, are not going to be interested right now. And they probably won't be interested in 10 years. Maybe in 20 years they will. In 30 years, they almost certainly will. But, so it made me think of that point of, or the insufficient discourse, in my opinion, about how we should be looking at the development of Bitcoin and how we make changes to it. I think everyone would agree, if there's anything catastrophic happening that needs to be fixed, a bug or whatever, absolutely, that takes priority. But how should we be prioritizing and thinking about changes that are not mission critical, that are just nice to haves, and to what and what are the trade-offs when we actually decide to make those changes?
Yeah. So there's two things I want to sort of point out there. One is, you mentioned the kind of the measures, right? And one that I hear getting thrown around a lot is like, oh, you look at how many developers there are in the Bitcoin ecosystem versus like the Ethereum one. That's like, so like, congratulations, bro. Like, you got more devs. Doesn't mean shit. I'm sorry, but like, Bitcoin's not a software platform. It's not a virtual machine to sort of build ICOs and crap off. Like it's like people are trying to apply these strange measures. It's like it's almost like saying my concrete has more nutrients. So it has my food has more nutrients than your concrete. It's right. Like, okay, I'm sure it does, bro, but like it doesn't matter. Like it's a different thing. And this is why I laid out the article in the beginning with like, okay, Bitcoin's it's not an app, it's not a smartphone, it's not a computer, it's not a website, it's not a product or a service. It's none of these things. It's not a technology. So stop trying to like project these technological adoption curves on it. It's like, oh yeah, Bitcoin's been around for 15 years and nothing's happened. It's like, well, no, something has happened, but Bitcoin's is sort of socio-economic, technological, like it's all these things sort of wrapped into one. And when you think about it, like what we're asking people to do all around the world is trust their fucking wealth, man, with something that they don't understand. Like, and just giving it more features doesn't mean more people are going to understand it. Like, if you can do conditional, covenant-based transactions on Bitcoin, do you think that's going to make my mum like put all her wealth in it? Get the fuck out of here, bro. Like, no, it's no way in hell. Like, so anyway, to sort of what you said, like, Bitcoin's just going to, its number one actual feature is actually the unchangeableness of it. So, what it benefits from is, more time in which it doesn't change, and it, maintains sort of the promise and the narrative that has sort of got it to this stage. And, at some point, as the rest of the world deteriorates, people will sort of start to change the lens through which they view Bitcoin as not internet funny money, but as sound money. And that I just don't think we can speed up. There's no technical innovation that can speed up Bitcoin's perception by the world as sound money. You can't change 5,000 years of conditioning with some technical upgrades. It's just not going to work. And like, I wasn't this harsh in the article. I was trying to be more pragmatic and trying to think of it generationally. But I honestly think like that sort of dawned on me. I was at Satoshi Roundtable a couple of weeks ago, and some of the talk was like driving me crazy. It's like, oh, we have to do this, we have to do that. It's like sort of as if like Bitcoin's under some existential threat tomorrow of Ethereum eclipsing it. Like, bro, come on. Like, there's nothing going wrong at the moment, and like the drive chain stuff like kind of annoys me. And like I'm not involved enough to understand all of the intricacies of why, drive chain is better and all of the stuff that it's going to enable Bitcoin to do. But, I remember like having a discussion with someone, and they sort of said like, drive chain is a better form of liquid, and, liquid obviously sucks. No one's using it. And I said, thank you. You just proved the point. No one's using liquid because you can do everything you can do like that drive chain does. But newsflash, no one gives a shit. So if we're going to go and like do all this stuff to Bitcoin, and build, a bunch of extra features into it, and no one's going to give a shit, then I'm sorry, it's just, it's a moot point.
Yeah. Well, that's the point I'm getting at, right? Like, to what extent do our expectations for this phenomenon, the speed of it, what it looks like, all that kind of stuff, cause us to be insufficiently humble in relation to this supposed absolute, right? And again, we kind of wind up the same structure, I think, is evident in many different places, perhaps no more than the religious, right? Like you submit to an absolute, and that's part of the act of preserving it, or of accessing its value, let's say. And I obviously don't know the answer here, but I do get nervous when I just see people have basically arbitrary expectations. Oh, Bitcoin should be more adopted by now. Really? Who says that? Why should it be more adopted right now? Or Bitcoin we should have hyperbitcoinization in 10 years. Why? Where is that written, in stone? And so based off of those expectations, then ideas come up, and then people want to make themselves relevant. I don't mean that pejoratively at all. I mean, we all want relevance, right? We want to commit ourselves to meaningful work. And so you go, oh, well, it's not where it should be. I have the capacity to do something, to make it something different, make it more attractive, make it meet that expectation of mine. And so I'm going to do that. And then we get potentially harmful tinkering. And the question is like, how harmful is that? And, maybe it's not that harmful, on a certain frequency, but maybe that frequency picks up when because anytime you do something and the consequences don't manifest, you think, oh, sweet, it worked. And you get bolder and bolder and bolder. You get less humble and less humble and less humble until you actually, you break the thing, or you impair it, or you're whatever. And so, again, the question is how, like, where is this discussion, and how much patience should we be having to manage those expectations and allow ourselves, or dedicate ourselves, to be more humble towards what's actually happening here?
Yeah. I mean, it's, you just touched on something really good there, is like the problem may not be the change specifically. The problem may be that the change actually is successful and does no damage, and sets the stage for a further change and a further change. And it basically changes the ethos of what we're doing. And I think Bitcoin's primary feature is that it's unchangeable, or that it doesn't change. Like, and I think that point is, probably hasn't dawned on enough people, particularly those that are more technically inclined. Totally. I would say is, like, if you're technically inclined and you're proficient at, tinkering and stuff like that, your predisposition is towards, changing and tinkering stuff. But I really don't think that, erring towards no is sometimes just the better decision. Just
as you tinker, and as the frequency of those changes occur, then your sphere of things that are legitimately on the table for change just grows, right? It's like, first it's like, all right, we have this big, we're not going to change all these different things. And then you're like, oh, well, we can change this. That's not critical. Or we can change that. And then until you wind up being like, well, I guess we can change anything about it if we can conjure up a type of logic or rationale, right? And that, I mean, and that's the thing that concerns me to a certain degree. It's like, who said, you know, as we were saying earlier, kind of in relation to your, you know, perspective and way of acting during the COVID years, let's say, it's like, how do you know that however you're devising your logic, your rationale, or what your expectations or what you think a thing should be, I mean, how do you know that's valid or as valid as it could be? You know, we're all fallible. We all make mistakes. We all have blind spots. And so I think, you know, I share the opinion with you. Like, the most valuable thing about this is that there's an element of it that does not change. And to what extent how much creep is there basically toward ultimately being at the doorstep of rationalizing, changing even the thing that supposedly can't be changed, let's say 21 million.
Yeah.
And, you know, there's already discourse about that. And so there's discourse, and it's always technical. And I'd like to see more discussion about how people should be thinking, how node runners, you know, people that are going to be, you know, so-called casting votes in things like this, how they should be thinking about change to this system at all, and what changes are legitimate, and how patient we should be being, and, you know, all the different stuff that's wrapped up in that. And it's by no means a simple subject, but it's probably the most important one. You know, I just don't see that much dialogue on it.
This is where, like, people's knowledge base around Bitcoin does need to broaden, right? And, you know, it's almost it's funny to watch, like, the, you know, almost the different schools in sort of the Bitcoin ecosystem sort of emerge out of this. You know, you've got the techies kind of coming out and saying, you know, we need to do this, and then almost like the Austrian kind of thinkers and all that sort of stuff saying, well, you know, no, like, you know, Bitcoin is money. And then there's almost like this kind of third group, which is, you know, maybe like a more holistic viewpoint of, you know, Bitcoin as a movement, or as, like, you know, as we've called it, like this, you know, truth, or this, you know, this thing. And, you know, we sort of, you know, I think maybe we kind of sit more in that camp. And, you know, I align far more with the sort of the Austrian thinking of this is a money first and foremost. I think it's more than just the money. You know, I think it's, you know, got a lot more going on. But when I sort of view it through that lens, you know, if anything, like, while the technological backbone of Bitcoin is like, well, I should rephrase, the technological element of Bitcoin is the backbone. Like, if, you know, without the technology, it doesn't exist. You know, what that represents is something of, you know, a higher order. I don't know if I'm articulating that correctly, but like that higher order discussion, as you said, is not being had. Like, we're having a technical discussion. We're in the fucking weeds arguing about whether a feature is useful or not. And we're missing the higher argument of whether we should even be having that discussion or not. And that's a completely different level of discussion. And I would say probably more important level of discussion, considering the importance of what the hell we've got on our hands here. Like, I want to know that the stuff that I've got in cold storage multi-sig is going to be there 100 years from now. Like, and I'm pretty sure that if we don't fucking touch Bitcoin at the moment, like, or ever again, it's probably still going to be there. But I'm not sure that if we start messing with things, whether that's going to be the case. And that, to me, is just hands down just tells me, you know, what sort of how we should view any potential technical changes.
Yeah. You know, it sometimes makes me think, and the comparison is not perfectly apt, and it's already happened to some degree in shitcoins, but, you know, as even the dominant monotheistic religions of the past have fractured in various ways as they've developed because of effectively ideological differences between the different factions, will that be Bitcoin's fate in the future? Like, will it be, oh, this group, you know, it's still, I mean, again, that has happened to some degree, but even a narrower disagreement, and, you know, certain people go this way, certain people go that way, you know, who knows? But again,
that's an interesting one. Yeah, that
I
that
just
is an
would,
interesting one. Yeah, kind of like maybe there's like a few flavors of Bitcoin in the future, and I mean that would kind of suck. Maybe that might be an intermediate phase because sort of money does have this uh kind of concentrating effect, right? So
right,
it's a little bit,
right.
different than an ideology. So I still think, on a
The
long
market
enough
will
time
sort it out.
scale, yeah, exactly, we get
Yeah.
there. But there is the risk that we kind of, through our own stupidity and hubris, kind of put ourselves through another 50 years of like
That's
mess, just
that's always a
because,
risk, our own stupidity and hubris, right? And that's the
yeah,
thing that we should, at least to the extent that we can, try to prevent. But we're always building towers of Babel, right?
yeah, we are totally.
All right,
Um, go,
go ahead.
go, go.
I was just gonna say, last thing that I have for you is, and again, I think this is highly bear market driven, but well, I mean, I think the sentiments that you and I shared earlier on about readjusting focus, I've noticed a lot of people doing that, and it's people seem far more committed to cutting out noise, cutting out distractions, cutting out things that aren't important or meaningful, and focusing on those that are, whether they be in the realm of health, career, whatever. And I wonder if that's just our cohort and this current time, and I'm thinking about this through the lens of your article about the different phases of Bitcoin's development. Um, like, why is it seemingly kind of going quiet around here? And as new people come in, let's say you come in today, you're new, like you read all the books and stuff, but there's not the same amount of exuberance and excitement and hoopla that there has been in other periods. Will that inform how you go about doing this thing? Like, you just look around and you're like, oh, so people just adopt this, they save in it, they use it where they can and where they want
Mm,
to, and otherwise they
mm.
go on about their life trying to move towards what's most valuable and meaningful to them. And that makes a ton of sense to me. So I'm going to do that. And so my question is, do you think that's kind of a part of the next phase that we're moving into, or is it just, bear market things?
My guess is that I think that will come. My guess is that probably at least my first generation guess of like the first 20 years is probably going to be on point. Like we probably have to go through 20 years of the infection stage. And I think the speculation needs to just drive Bitcoin's liquidity up. So I'm kind of like thinking of this first phase through an economic lens, and then I'm extrapolating backwards, saying, okay, well, if we're looking through it through an economic lens, how do we actually get there? So then the psychological lens is that we still treat it like a gambling thing. And I'm also just thinking because, through all the traveling that I've done, and I'm sort of building networks outside of Bitcoin now. And when I just talk to people, they still, just fundamentally not ready. Like I tried to pay my rent the other day, where I am now in Bitcoin, and I couldn't. The person was like, "Oh, well, I'm not.
I try to do
I
that
don't
too.
understand this
And
thing."
they
Yeah.
even have a ledger, and they have Bitcoin and shitcoins and all that kind of stuff, but they weren't interested in anymore.
Oh, really? Okay, interesting. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
so I mean, this one didn't have a ledger or anything, but it was just like, oh, we don't do that here, right? That was sort of the response. So that kind of tells me like we've probably still got quite a way. And my guess, like with sort of two more halvings before the end of this decade, we'll probably see at least the transition towards that. And maybe, after the second halving, the proverbial bear market that comes after that, maybe from an amplitude standpoint, it's, more subtle because I mean, two halvings, we could be at that $1 million mark. And at that point, you've got sort of cent sat parity. And that's a really important point for Bitcoiners because at that point, I don't think people will be looking at the Bitcoin price as much. It'll be the sat price.
Mm.
I think there's a real phase shift. Kind of like think about phase shifts. The best example is like water, ice, and gas, right? So there's a particular point at which the H2O actually transforms into a different state.
Mm.
And there's like gas, then liquid, and then all of a sudden liquid, and then all of a sudden solid. So Bitcoin will probably go through the same thing in these sort of generational shifts. Like, once the perception of Bitcoin is that, hey, this is like $1 million, like the average person will not be able to buy a Bitcoin. It'll be reserved, like a whole Bitcoin will sort of move into a new phase, and it'll be perceived as something that only organizations or the very rich can actually still acquire. And they probably won't look like, maybe organizations will put it on their balance sheet, because at $1 million, not only is it sort of reserved for that sort of layer or status, but also at $1 million you'll have so much more liquidity that a $10,000 a day price movement in price is meaningless. So you sort of dampen the volatility at that point. So at that point, organizations will be more akin or likely to putting it on their treasury. But most people then will begin to perceive Bitcoin as Satoshis. And most applications will probably not represent Bitcoin in terms of what you're sending. Like, I think that phase will have disappeared. Like, everything will be in sats. And the relationship to Bitcoin, with the dampening of the volatility and the way we interact with it and how we perceive it, I think will change the behavior. And yeah, maybe two halvings from now, we start to maybe move into what you're discussing, which is the difference of, I just save in this. It's what I have. That's where I keep my savings. And I'm no longer trying to gamble with it, because, the gambling opportunity came and went. That was the last phase.
Mm-hmm. So for people like you and I, and, many people we know that have been here for a while, because again, I get this sense of focus, I guess is probably the right word, but I think a lot of people are like, yeah, I get it. Seen all the stuff, charts, thesis, macro stuff. I pretty much get it. And I don't need, that stuff doesn't interest me as much anymore. And so I'm just going to focus on what's most meaningful, stack my sats, and, go on to becoming and contributing to this sort of parallel economy. Is that just me? Do you notice, something similar in yourself or in the people you mix it up with, that there's kind of it's not a bad thing. I'm not saying that people are bored with things. I think people are just like, I get it. And it's a better use of my time to focus on either things I don't get or that I need to work towards and build, rather than, keep giving myself the dopamine hit of things I already get by people I already know their shtick and that kind of stuff.
Maybe. I think, like, maybe there's like a 5-year time span, that you have to sort of go through and be like really in it, and, writing and commenting on Twitter and, spaces and all this sort of stuff. And, maybe you have to go through a couple bear cycles and a couple bull cycles and all that sort of stuff to kind of get the, maybe your own personal phase shift.
Right.
And maybe we all have to go through a personal phase shift that might, on average last 5 years. And then sort of collectively enough people have gone through that 5 years phase shift that we have a large enough cohort that we then, move into the next, larger collective phase shift of Bitcoin and the way it's perceived in the marketplace itself. Because, arguably, the people who got into Bitcoin in 2010, 2011, I think a lot of them are far more quiet, than sort of the class that got in, 2015, 2016. And then, I'm honestly happy, like, at this point, to pass the, baton on to the class of 2020, and they can go to war on Twitter and, do their thing, and sort of carry Bitcoin through the next cycle. I'll be far more quiet about it. And that feels good. So yeah, maybe there's a thing there. And we've all got to sort of like earn our stripes in some sense.
Yeah. I mean, I pretty much, the reason why I ask is because it's hard for, as is the case either with you now or what I'm sure you'll find, is like, because we've both focused, right, and stepped back from certain placing our attention in certain places, it's hard to gauge, right? Like I can't tell if everyone is just off living their best life, or if that's just, me and you and a group of other, some other people. But anyways, all right, this is actually the last thing, because I wanted to ask it to you in the last topic, but I forgot. But as part of, and then I promise I'll let you go. As part of the this whole like how and when should Bitcoin be changed sort of argument. I mean, you and I have discussed this a lot, as have many others, that Bitcoin changes you, right? And I think necessarily part of the reason it changes you is because of what it is. Now, we might spend hours and hours trying to articulate what Bitcoin is and its meaning and its implications and all that. So I don't want to get into that. I just want to say that's how things change you, right? Like it's you interfacing with something as it is, something, its nature, what it represents, and the relationship there is what causes one to change. And people are finding that Bitcoin is incredibly transformational, let's say, because whatever it is having that effect. And I think a lot of us tend to think that those are very positive transformations. I've heard countless from people, like known people and unknown people, about how engaging in this, learning about it, adopting it in their life has had profound positive influences. And one of the things that I am considering and borderline concerned about is if we continue down that road of continuously changing this thing, again, to what degree are we making it conform to our inefficiencies, to our insecurities, to our imperfections, instead of forcing ourselves to adapt to it? And it seems to be the case that the latter is a far more productive, healthy, constructive way of going about things because of the results that it elicits. I mean, again, we go back to clown world. One of the ways you could characterize clown world is just people expecting the world to conform to them, to their biases, their prejudices, their bullshit, their insecurities, their fears, their weaknesses, all that stuff. And so it seems like part of the reason why Bitcoin is exerting this positive impact on people is because it's doing the opposite. It's saying, I ain't changing. If you want like me in your life, you're the one that has to change. You have to take the responsibility. You have to learn. You have to expand your understanding or intellectual capacity in a number of different areas. You have to enhance, blah, 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 all the way down the line. And so one of the concerns is, and perhaps again, the Tower of Babel sort of thing is a good metaphor, but we change it so much that it has a diminishing impact on, it has diminishing demands on changes in ourselves, which are beneficial. And do we just continue to neuter that until we've conformed it to ourselves rather than the opposite way around? And that is a far less beneficial circumstance than otherwise could have been the case.
Man, totally. You touch on such an important point. So it reminds me of Saifedean wrote a piece for the Bitcoin Times edition 5 for the Austrian edition, and it's called "Making Time Preference Great Again" or something, or making time preference low again. And this is something that loads of Bitcoiners talk about, like time preference, and how Bitcoin changes time preference, and lowers it, blah blah blah. And this sort of pokes at the heart of this confluence or this intersection of like discussions of morality, of discussions of human behavior, how we behave, how we adapt ourselves, the discussion about time preference and how much we value the future and things like that, all sort of hinges on this notion of time preference. And you can only have time preference with certainty, and you can only have certainty when you sort of trust that something's unchanging. Like I don't get up out of bed and walk across the floor like if I didn't know for certain that the ground would be there, right? Like so you need a base level of certainty, and this ties into like things like Maslow's hierarchies and Tony Robbins' the 6 human needs. Like certainty is sort of like the foundational need, and Bitcoin sort of is everyone talks about sort of the foundational essence of Bitcoin. It is this foundational thing, and if you want to be foundation, you have to be certainty driven. Like that's sort of the North Star. And, Saylor has a great analogy, like Bitcoin is granite, right? And you want a strong foundation. You want granite to build upon. You don't want to build on quicksand. And, to your point, what you're saying is like the more we try and change it, the more we turn it into something that is malleable. And, it being malleable or moldable or changeable, etc., is actually the wrong thing. And, in doing that, like, we lose the muscle that we build when, kind of confronting something that is immovable, right? Like, and I mean, you could link this back to things like going to train at the gym, right? Like lifting heavy weights, you're sculpting yourself against resistance. And if you just went in there and spent time lifting feathers, like nothing is gonna, like if you keep making the weight lighter so that you can adapt it so it's easier for you and more comfortable and sounds nicer or whatever, you're not going to change. You're not going to get better. And that's a big risk. And this is sort of ties back to what I said earlier, is people need to broaden their understanding of what Bitcoin is. And, to show my Bitcoin Times publication again is like each year I try and, like, the whole premise of why I'm doing that is each year I want to do a theme that looks at Bitcoin through a different lens. And, last year's theme was, let's look at Bitcoin through an Austrian lens and Austrian economics through a Bitcoin lens, because each theme will be a way to understand Bitcoin through the theme, but also look at how Bitcoin sort of, looks back at you, right? And like impacts the theme itself. And, that's sort of what we did with this edition. And, the previous one was sort of A New Hope. The previous one was that Promethean edition. This year we're going to do the energy edition. I really want to do like a theology edition, or sort of like a higher truth edition, where I want you to be involved, and, some other great thinkers in Bitcoin. But, this sort of inquiry on Bitcoin, and sort of the broadening of, our individual perception of what Bitcoin is, hopefully leads people to, a similar realization of, maybe tinkering is not a good idea. Maybe sort of the way we think we can adapt this to us instead of us adapting to it is perhaps not the right philosophy and approach. So anyway, I guess that's a long way of me saying I agree with you. I think it's a very dangerous precedent to sort of think that this is a thing to adapt versus a thing to adapt to.
Yeah. No, I think that's very well said. And my final point on it is just that, again, you have to consider that in your effort to speed up adoption, you have to recognize that you're actually going to be changing slightly or grossly where you end up, right? So if all the way along the process you force people to take the responsibility and to educate themselves and to do it, like whatever the demands of current Bitcoin are on an individual to truly adopt it, if you change that, then you're also going to wind up with different individuals who have adopted it on the other side, right? Because let's say you're lowering the bar to some degree in this example. And so when we think about like that Bitcoin future, that parallel economy, a hyper-Bitcoinized world, the Bitcoin Renaissance, and we think about the type of people that we either expect or would like to see there, that is highly dependent on what happens to this thing throughout that process, right? If you continue lowering the bar in order to accelerate adoption, what do you get in the end? Maybe Bitcoin does survive, but you're also going to get less of those, what I think you and I would perceive to be beneficial changes on an individual level as a result of having confronted this thing and adopted it, without, what's the word?
Turning it into a fucking participation award, like
yeah, exactly. Without
it's the essence of what you're saying. Yeah.
Exactly.
This reminds me of
compromise. Without compromise. That's what I was looking for. Yeah.
This reminds me of the Remnant series that I did, right? Like my whole point of the Remnant series is that like we don't need to drive for mass adoption. Like right now it's like selective adoption, and there should be a barrier to entry. There should be work that goes into people trying to understand Bitcoin and all that sort of stuff, and that's fine. Like we shouldn't be like coming to it from a place of sort of like desperation, like, oh, we need people to like accept Bitcoin, and like accept us as Bitcoiners, because we're so we're so right or virtuous or whatever. Like, it's like, no, like
A lot of
you sort of like,
pitfalls on that path.
totally, man. And like, like real leadership is honestly, you know, showing up by example, and then inspiring others through example to sort of want to be like you. And I actually gave a super impromptu talk in Prague last year at the Liberty in Our Lifetimes conference. And one of the things I said there was, I said, there's a lot of libertarians, a lot of people who want sort of freedom and everything like that. I said, instead of bickering and complaining about how bad the government and the state is, I said, you need to become the best version of yourself. And if you want other people to be sort of libertarian and freedom minded, fucking be an example of someone others want to be like. And if you do that, you'll have far more success and long-term success than, being kind of that, like, once again, it is a
token libertarian.
The token libertarian, right? There's like the fat slob with the long hair and the shirt that don't tread on me, right? Like that doesn't inspire anyone, right? And not saying that they're all like that, but there is a large cohort, right? That sort of behaves like that, and that ain't gonna inspire anyone. And maybe that sort of ties in to Bushido of Bitcoin and why I wrote that is like, without going on that tangent, we'll do a future interview for that. What kind of men and women do we want to be? What virtues do we want to embody and extol?
Exactly.
In this sort of new era that's going to emerge. And anyway,
you get the double whammy there, right? You get improvement in your own life and the things that are meaningful to you, and you represent the most effective orange pill or red pill or whatever pill you're trying to deliver simultaneously. Because as you say, I mean, your results are what inspire others to follow your lead. And then you doing that to yourself is what allows you to achieve the things that you want. And so both happen. And I agree that I mean, that approach takes wisdom, right? Because the impulsive thing, the immediately gratifying thing is to say, I'm right. I know the solution to the problem. This is why you need to adopt it. This is why you need to understand it. And I'm the person to tell you about it. Like, there is a lot of bullshit wrapped up in that. And you can see why people are reject that. That's not a very effective strategy. But the one that you outlined is. And to the point about your upcoming book, Bushido, which we will definitely have to do another pod about, I think it's going to be along those lines, right? It's going to be about, like, that's what it's about. What are the virtues and the principles and the values that have been elucidated or amplified as a result of your journey down the Bitcoin rabbit hole? And of course, your investigation of all sorts of other, wisdom and historical figures and stuff like that, that enable one to do that, to do just that. And so I can't wait to have a chat about that when it's done and when I've had a chance to read it, because I'm sure it's going to be great.
Totally. I appreciate that, man. And yes, I echo everything you said. And I think, this journey has just been fantastic. And honestly, and I've said this before on, when you're joining me on my podcast, I think there's always a few bright spots for me in, like, sort of the Bitcoin space, of people that I sort of see not only eye to eye to, but sort of feel like, just get life at a deeper sense. And you're definitely one of those. Like, since we first caught up, Jesus, what was it, like 2017, 2018, when we first did the first rapid fire, when I came on your show, and like we were still like, these little Bitcoin Padawans, right? Like, we were innocent, trying to navigate what the hell this thing is, but we had a deep conversation and sort of like, kindred spirits in that sense. And
totally.
It's been a fantastic journey, man, honestly.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And isn't it weird how time in Bitcoin just has a different feel? I don't know if it's sometimes like so much seems to happen in a short period of time, or something that was recent feels like a long time ago. But 2019 might have been the first time we spoke, because I think that's when I started the pod. But even that, on the calendar, it doesn't seem like that long ago. But that conversation seems like a long time ago. Our first chat.
Yeah, wild. Okay, shit. I didn't realize it. It literally felt to me like 2017. Like I felt like it's
Yeah,
got to be at least 6 years.
exactly.
Yeah, wow. Okay.
Yeah, it's weird. All right, man. I've taken up more of your time than I asked for, so
No
I'll let you
worries.
go. But
No, no, no.
any closing remarks or final words or anything you want to get off your
Closing
chest?
remarks. Okay. I think I would say, I mean, my guess is that most people have probably read UnCommunist, but if they haven't, I'd love for them to go out, check it out. It's on Amazon. They can pick it up. It's cheap. I think also the Bitcoin Times, that's something I've been trying to shill recently because, as I said earlier, I think getting these, for me, that's a project of, quality over quantity. 21 editions over 21 years. The collectible itself printed 2,100 times with the number on the back and all that sort of stuff. But like this, I themed it that way because I want it to represent quality over quantity, and each year has its own set of themes. And I think people sort of come away, like the first shipments of edition 5 started going out a couple of weeks back, and the response that I've had from people has been phenomenal. They're like, holy shit, this is the best piece of Bitcoin literature I've bought. Or I had one guy, actually, let me read this message. It was hilarious. This is such a funny message. Where's the dude, William? So he messages me. He's like, hey Svetsky, I spent today reading the Bitcoin Times, and there have been many moments where I've dropped the magazine to stare into the middle distance and contemplate what I've been reading.
That's awesome.
My favorite issue is the Austrian edition, and the content, artwork, and feel of each copy is quality. He said, I have to say, I had a churning feeling. I don't like spending stats, but they are pure signal, thought-provoking, and inspiring. So anyway, like I think that sort of stuff, like because there is a lot of Bitcoin content, like everyone's a writer today, and everyone's writing articles and all that sort of stuff. But what I've really tried to do with this is pick the best of the best, whether it's thinkers or whatever, and compile them. And if people want to support that, like it's sats only, bitcointimes.io, and they can pick up a piece of memorabilia, but also something of quality. And then the last thing is to keep an eye out for the Bushido of Bitcoin, which we were going to discuss. I was going to do a crowdfund for it, but that turned out to be too complicated with the way the publisher relationship is with this book. So they're just going to have to wait for the launch in June, July. And I think that may be the most important work I've ever written. So without blowing smoke up my ass, I think it's a good one, and I think people will enjoy it.
Is it going to be longer than UnCommunist?
Yeah. I did 60,000 words in 6 weeks. Like I fucking hit this one hard.
I just did a dump, like organizing notes yesterday for what I've been writing, and it's 176,000 words so far.
Jesus.
I haven't even, a lot of that is obviously overlap, and there's much editing to be done, but no narrative in place yet, just kind of so fuck, I don't know, who knows when that's going to be a thing. Definitely
welcome to the tough part, bro. This is where like
are you self-publishing this one?
No, this one I'm publishing with Bitcoin Magazine. So
cool.
This one, this one I gave to them because I thought they can hopefully get bigger reach. So let's see. It'll actually be interesting to see comparing the numbers we hit at UnCommunist versus these.
What kind of reach can they provide?
I mean, they've got, obviously on Twitter they have 2 million.
Promotion. Yeah, promotional.
Stuff. Yeah, but so like really
distribution wise, is it the same?
I think distribution wise it'll be similar. They're going to get me more than just Amazon, obviously. So it'll be in bookshelves. It'll be right, broader and wider that way.
Right. They've distributed the mag and they have those relationships and stuff, right?
Yeah, and I wouldn't know the first thing about how to sort of engage anything beyond Amazon. So anyway, like I'm giving away a decent chunk for it, but hey, like I said, I'm not really doing this for the money. So for me, if I can get this message out to a wider audience, like I would love to see this one sell 50,000 copies and like really sort of I want people to sort of, get Bitcoin standard for understanding Bitcoin and sort of get the Bushido of Bitcoin for understanding what it means to be a Bitcoiner. Like that's sort of how I'm envisioning this.
Well, I suspect it will be the first of many books in your collection at some point. So like I said, when it's done, you'll have to come back on and we can get deep in the weeds on that one.
For sure, brother.
All right, brother. Great to talk, and take care. I'll talk to you again soon.
As always, man. Thank you so much.